Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Casey, and I serve as the chair of the Financial Accounting Foundation. I'd like to start by welcoming our stakeholders joining us this afternoon. Today's meeting will include reports from the FASB Chair, the GASB Chair, the FAF Executive Director, and the FAF Treasurer. We will also receive reports about the latest activities of the Financial Accounting Standards Advisory Council and the Governmental Accounting Standards Advisory Council. We'll also receive a report from the Trustees Standard Setting Process Oversight Committee. Before we get to these reports, I'd like to start by thanking Robert Scott for his service as GASAC Chair. His term will end in December of this year, but he may not be able to attend our meeting in November, and we wanted to be sure to acknowledge his contributions to the GASAC. So thank you, Robert, for your significant leadership and contributions to the GASAC and work of the GASB. We are sincerely grateful for your service and wish you the very best. Robert will be succeeded by Elizabeth Pierce. Ms. Pierce served as the treasurer of the state of Vermont since 2011 and previously served as the state's deputy treasurer. We look forward to welcoming Beth as she takes on this new role. In addition, I'm pleased to announce the appointment of David Pesch, head of surety from Munich Re Specialty Insurance, as a new member of the Private Company Council. Mr. Pesch has over 30 years experience in the surety field and is a frequent speaker on issues related to the construction industry. Mr. Pesch will succeed David Lomax, whose second and final term will end in December of this year. I also had the pleasure of announcing the reappointment of Candace Wright of the Private Company Council as chair. Ms. Wright will be serving her final 2 years as chair beginning January of 2022. Ms. Wright is a director of Postlethwaite and Netterville, a Louisiana-based firm. So I want to say thank you again to Candace for continuing her service as chair of the PCC. We're most grateful again for your commitment. Finally, I'd like to take a moment to thank the boards and staff at the FASB and GASB and the FAF. They have continued to support and engage with our stakeholders while working remotely during the pandemic, and we are grateful to them for their dedication and resilience. We hope and look forward to returning back to in-person meetings in the fall, local and national conditions permitting. With that, let's move into our regular agenda. The first item of business is to approve the minutes from the board's May 19 and July 29, 2021 meetings. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Thank you very much. We will now move to reports from the FASB, FASAC, GASB, and GASAC. We'll start off from hearing from Rich Jones, the chair of the FASB. Rich.
Great. Thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon and good morning to those trustees on the West Coast. It's my pleasure to report on the activities of the FASB here for the second quarter of 2021. During the second quarter, we continued to prioritize the three items: the development of our invitation to comment related to agenda outreach. The second is our ongoing post-implementation review process on revenue recognition, leasing, and the current expected credit loss model, or otherwise known as CECL. And then finally, the work on our existing agenda. But before I get into those three items in additional detail, I did want to draw your attention to our newly issued, and by newly I mean today, Investor Outreach Report, which is available on the FASB website. That report provides insight into how investors play a key role in all of our standard setting processes, how they have a presence on all of our advisory councils, and also talks about over 400 interactions with investors that were substantially all FASB initiated throughout the course of the past year. So I'd be very interested in if you could take a look. There's also opportunities linked in that report for people wanting to participate in our process. Moving on to the three items that I mentioned earlier, the first being the invitation to comment. Our agenda outreach efforts included discussion with over 200 stakeholders during the quarter, over 1/3 of which were investors. And I do want to thank our team, particularly Hillary Salo, Erica Friend, Alicia Posta, and Steve Whitman, for an extraordinary amount of work in that very short time frame in pulling that document together. Comments are due by September 22nd, and I will say the ITC is a summary of the input we received and provides an opportunity for all of our stakeholders to provide input on what we should be working on from a standard setting perspective. You'll notice that the input we've collected to date is broken into 4 categories. The first, providing more disaggregation, granularity of financial information. The second, providing more guidance around emerging areas in financial reporting. The third, reevaluating specific areas of GAAP to reduce unnecessary cost and complexity. And I would emphasize unnecessary cost and complexity as much of an issue for an investor as it is for a preparer. And then finally, enhancing and providing more education around certain FASB standard setting processes to help increase transparency. While you may not find your particular issue in that 40 pages, I would also emphasize that it's designed to be open-ended. So to the extent any of our stakeholders would like to comment on something beyond what's in that document, we are certainly open to hearing that feedback. Moving on to our existing agenda, I'm happy to report that over the past year, we have covered and redeliberated over 95% of the items that were on our agenda. Part of the reason for doing that was recognizing that some of those were longstanding projects. Our board composition has changed since those items were added. And we were particularly focused on setting forth a path to what I call achievable standard setting on those projects. And we've continued to make great progress in that area. I would also note that one of the reasons we're doing that is to make sure that we have capacity to work on the items that are of the greatest interest to our stakeholders. Moving on to the post-implementation review, I will say we continue to make progress on the PRR related to revenue recognition, leasing, and CECL. In fact, we've initiated certain standard setting activity specifically in response to investor input related to those 3 topics. That's included the recognition of revenue contracts in a business combination, adding a project on acquired loans in a business combination related to CECL, also adding a project to consider the elimination of the troubled debt restructuring category of loan accounting for entities that are applying our CECL model, and then finally, for lessor accounting for leases with variable rentals. In addition to all that activity during the second quarter, we also said goodbye to longstanding board member Hal Schroeder. But with that departure, we were also able to welcome Fred Cannon onto our board. Fred brings a long history of investor experience, and he's been a great addition to our board, and you can tune in almost any Wednesday and see him in action on our board meetings. So welcome, Fred. I also want to welcome Nellie Devler, who has joined us as our Assistant Technical Director. We're reporting to Hillary Salo. Also a great addition to our staff. And with that, that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions, Kathy, from you or the other trustees.
Thanks so much, Rich. Appreciate your update. Are there questions from the trustees for Rich? Mary.
Rich, I wanted to congratulate you on the investor outreach report. I think it's excellent. I think our investor stakeholders are going to find it quite interesting. I'm wondering how you're going to assess the success of those efforts in engaging investors in response to this report.
So I guess, Mary, the way I look at it is our ultimate success is the quality of the standards that we produce. And I think that what you've seen is those over 400 touch points with investors this year. That's how we draw them into our process. We get a lot of comment letters from preparers. We get a lot of comment letters from practitioners, but we don't get a lot of comment letters from investors. So we recognize we need to go above and beyond and draw them into our process. But I do believe the ultimate test is the quality of the standards that we produce and the quality of financial reporting.
Other questions for Rich? Sue.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Rich, for your report. Could you talk, please, a little bit about the joint meeting you held with the IASB in July? What was discussed? How did that meeting go? And what kind of updates can you give us on what sort of communication you plan for the future with that group as well?
Great. Thanks, Sue. A great question. While it may not be as much in the out in the public, we have regular interaction with the IASB and the IASB staff. In fact, our staff and their staff share the information that we gather in the outreach that we do on a regular basis. That being said, we both had projects on our agenda related to business combinations, specifically related to, in our case, related to goodwill. And after discussions with the IASB staff, we decided that it made sense to actually get together and share some of what we were hearing from board to board. And that was the major topic of our discussion at this past meeting. I will tell you that will not be the last. We will have ongoing discussions. They have some projects on their agenda where we already have standards. And it's informative for them to hear what we have to say. For example, in rate regulated accounting. That's an area where we have well-developed gap. The IASB does not. They're developing a new standard. So it is a two-way street, but I would tell you that sharing of information is ongoing. And I would tell you, I personally benefited greatly from that sharing and that information we were able to gather.
Thank you.
Other questions for Rich? Tim?
Thanks, Kathy. Hey, Rich, you mentioned the quality and value of our standards as being a good measurement of the success of the organization. And I know we've got a robust post-implementation review process to follow up on standards and see how effective we think they are and how we can improve. Any comments you might have on that? I know you've been looking at CECL on an ongoing basis,
Sure.
for instance.
No, Tim, that's a great question. In fact, we do have a section in our website dedicated to post-implementation review, so we can share real time with all of our stakeholders the input that we're hearing and the different actions we're taking. When I look at post-implementation review, recognizing it's done under the oversight of our Board of Trustees, I do see two main benefits. One, it enables us to fine-tune those major standards, because large standards like CECL, for example, are rarely one and done. There's usually some fine-tuning that occurs in the few years after they're issued. It helps us identify those issues on a very timely basis. But and secondly, and perhaps more importantly, it enables us to look at our overall standard setting process and say, what lessons can we learn from the way we set those major standards that could benefit us on an ongoing basis? And as you know, we report regularly to our Oversight Committee and to our Board of Trustees on the progress of that post-implementation review. We don't wait till it's done, but it's timely reporting, and it's something that we make every effort to be very transparent with our stakeholders on also.
Other questions? If not, thanks so much for your update, Rich.
Thank you.
We're going to now move to a report of the FASAC Chair. Mike?
Thanks, Kathy, and good day, everyone. My report can be found on master page 104 in your materials, and it includes activities through the end of June. Take a second here to highlight some recent and upcoming activities. Starting with our June 24th meeting, which included discussion on two topics. The first topic was financial accounting implications of critical audit matters. During that session, FASAC members discussed the potential standard setting implications related to the underlying accounting for the areas most frequently referenced as CAMs. It's important to note that this was not a review of the CAM process itself, but rather an exercise in using the CAM data set as an opportunity to consider what this data was telling us about financial reporting, if anything. Overall, council members indicated that the accounting areas identified as frequent CAMs were as expected, and there were no required changes to the underlying accounting. Investors and other financial statement users indicated that CAMs may provide additional context into accounting areas where there is a desire for more information in financial statement disclosures in certain areas, such as loss contingencies. Preparers indicated that CAMs generally did not result in additional financial statement disclosure, and that the complexity of the accounting area is typically aligned with the complexity of the underlying transactions. The second topic was implementation of leases. This is the second in a series of discussions of the FASB's post-implementation review of the lease standard. During that session, FASAC members discussed their assessment of the benefits and ongoing costs of applying the lease standard. Investors and other financial statement users generally stated that the new additional disclosure allowed users to enhance their analyses. Some council members indicated that the divergence between IFRS standards and GAAP results in more costs and reduced comparability. Most preparers indicated that the implementation and ongoing costs were higher than expected, primarily related to new or modifications to accounting systems. Some preparers noted that more cross-collaboration with their real estate groups, leading to better internal controls and better information within the organization. At our upcoming FASAC meeting on Thursday, September 30th, we anticipate that one of the topics will be financial performance reporting, structure of the performance statement. The purpose is to provide council member with an education and history about the project, including the alternatives that have been considered by the board and whether those alternatives have been applied, or if not, why. We are doing this in anticipation of a future session on this topic, but we thought this would provide a good baseline for the council members. So when we dive into that topic, they'll have some history. We also hold an administrative session that will discuss future FASAC meetings, travel, office policies, and some thought about when we might be able to get together face to face again. This is the time of year when we are also soliciting nominations for FASAC vacancies for terms beginning in January 2022. The nomination process is open to all who are interested. We are particularly interested in candidates from diverse backgrounds, including investors and other financial statement users, candidates from the nonprofit community, senior members of the academic and legal communities, and CAOs and CFOs from various industries, as well as any other candidates who have special attributes or a particular perspective that would add to the work of FASAC. And obviously, we would welcome any nominations you might have. We've also updated and include our longer-term outlook of potential FASAC topics for 2021 and 2022, which is on master page 108 of your materials. We welcome your input on these and any other topics that you think FASAC should consider in the future. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks very much for your report, Mike. Are there any questions for Mike? Mary?
So Mike, thank you for your report. I noticed in there you talk about a coffee talk session. And
Yes.
I wondered if you could elaborate on what that is and what you intend to achieve
absolutely.
by it. And I'd also like to know whether FASB members attend and what happens to insights shared there. Could you just tell me a little bit about it?
Sure. The purpose is, and not unlike your board, and given the turnover that we have on the council, with the pandemic, an increasingly large percentage of our candidates have never had the opportunity, our members have never had the opportunity to meet face to face. So this is really an attempt to build some of those social connections that you get, in the hallway, between meetings, over lunch, over dinner, what have you. So it tends to be, they're not accounting related topics. It's more, tell me about your background. How did you get here? What did you do? And all of you or any of you would be welcome to join. We've done them before, and we found it was just a helpful way to break the ice and help new members get sort of a running start and not feel like no one knows who they are or they don't know who anyone else is. So that's the purpose.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mike? If not, thanks again for your report, Mike. Appreciate all the good work that you and the FASAC are doing.
Thank you.
Our next report is from the chair of the GASB. Joel?
Thanks, Kathy. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending upon where you are. It's great to be with you today to talk about and update you on the GASB's activities. My report starts on master page 109 of your materials. It was a busy quarter for the GASB on our ongoing and comprehensive projects. Early in the quarter, we concluded our series of 8 public hearings and 2 user forums on the financial reporting model exposure draft, which is done in connection with our recognition concept statement. We also concluded early in the quarter a series of 6 public hearings and 2 user forums on our revenue and expense recognition preliminary reviews document. We got a lot of great input throughout those meetings from our stakeholders, as well as many comment letters on both projects. And we late in the quarter began the redeliberations for both of those projects, and that will continue over the next several months, if not longer. Additionally, during the quarter, we issued a new implementation guide update, the 2021 update to the guide that added 23 new questions that will help stakeholders in their implementation of our standards. In particular, most of the new questions added were related to the lease standard, which becomes effective for most governments in 2022. We also issued 4 exposure drafts during the quarter. The first on our renaming project, where we have proposed renaming the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report to be the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, or ACFR. The second exposure draft was an omnibus statement. The more significant provisions there relate to exchange financial guarantees entered into by the government, as well as a little bit of addition to our LIBOR transition provisions. Another exposure draft was issued on our accounting changes and error corrections project, which really deals with prior period adjustments, or what we used to call prior period adjustments. Finally, we had a re-exposure draft on our concept statement for the disclosure framework to better get some input on our better elaborated on characteristics related to essentiality for footnote disclosures. Additionally, during the quarter, we are excited to pilot 2 new outreach methods that we're trying on our accounting changes and error corrections project. One is an electronic input form that stakeholders can go online, answer some questions that we've posed related to that proposed standard, and provide their input that way. For those who might find the formal comment letter process maybe a little daunting, this is a different alternative method for them to provide input into our process on that project. Additionally, we recorded through a series of 3 short 2-minute or so videos on that same project, each detailing a certain important aspect related to that project. And the videos were geared towards our user stakeholders to try to encourage more engagement from them. So after they watch those videos, they're directed to the electronic input form so that they can, again, find it easier, hopefully, to participate in the process. So we're excited about those 2 new outreach methods. Finally, we continue to monitor the pandemic response that many of our governments are receiving in federal aid, in particular, the American Rescue Plan Act. So far, we have not determined that we don't have any official guidance similar to the technical bulletin we issued related to the CARES Act a year ago. Most of the technical inquiries we're getting on the ARPA funds are specific to a unique government or maybe governments within a specific state, but answers wouldn't necessarily apply across multiple governments. But we're certainly asking people to provide us with input if they need help from an accounting perspective related to the ARPA funds that many governments have now received. We certainly want to be available and issue such guidance. So with that, I'll conclude a high-level overview of our activity and be happy to answer anybody's questions.
Thanks so much, Joel. Questions for Joel? Lynnette?
Great, thanks, Kathy. Joel, first of all, I wanted to congratulate you and the staff for the very high ratings that you've received from stakeholders regarding the technical inquiries. Almost 98% satisfaction. That's terrific. And some people think it's easy to create the standards, but being available and willing to help in the implementation is equally important. So congratulations on that. I have a question on the recent roundtables on your pension standards as part of your post-implementation review process. Having come from the industry, I know there's nothing more controversial. Is there anything that you can share with us about those roundtables?
Yeah, Lynnette, we did have a series of 11 of those. A lot of time went into each of them. I observed 2 of them. Our great team is working on kind of compiling that information along with other post-implementation review input. I will say they covered, and the 2 that I observed, they covered a wide range of topics. The ones you would expect them to cover on those standards were a very comprehensive look. You're talking 3-4 hours some of those took. So a lot of good input from our stakeholders that we're really appreciative that they provided. And we will see once we aggregate all of that, where it takes us and what we find. But I do think that if you want an overall theme from what I have observed, that there's a very positive reaction overall to those standards and that they are working effectively. Certainly there might be some tweaks we can make, but I think overall the impression is very favorable, and at least in the ones I observed.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Mary?
Joel, I think it's great that you're trying to use different methods for technology to get input from stakeholders. And I'm just curious what the reaction has been. Have you learned from this? Are you going to change it, or is it successful, or what? Tell me about it.
Sure, Mary. Part of trying it was, figuring out the speed bumps along the way. So I don't think this will be the only time we will try it. We will try it again on another project once we have lessons learned. I will say that while I don't know that the input has started flooding in yet, but the comment period isn't over yet, and we usually get the comments pretty late in the process anyway. But the reaction when we talk about these, and we have been promoting these these new methods of outreach has been extremely receptive. People want to hear about them. They're excited that we're trying something new. So a lot of our stakeholders have been promoting the new ways of outreach and the new ways of input. So I think that there is a good appetite for us trying new things like these.
Rick.
Thanks, Kathy. Joel, as if your first year wasn't difficult enough, you had to replace longtime director of research and technical activities and David Bean, and I see Alan joining us today. I guess what plans might you have in the future, assuming we all get back to some semblance of normalcy here, to have Alan introduce more to the various stakeholders? Because I know a lot of folks are anxious to meet Alan more, and of course a lot of folks know Alan already. But what are your plans in that?
Sure, Rick. Alan is he is well known to many of our stakeholders. He's already been going through the car wash, so to speak. He's been meeting all our stakeholders already virtually. And I think that he will attend a lot of conferences probably this first year once we get back to doing that. Even maybe ones that we ordinarily may not take. Maybe he and I both go to, maybe only one of us would typically go to, but I'd like to take him around for me to meet some of these people in person for the first time too, because I started earlier than Alan, but I've been pretty virtual the whole time as well. So I think it's important that he and I both go out and meet with a lot of these stakeholders, and that is definitely our plan. But he certainly has hit the ground running and has met them all virtually already.
Any other questions for Joel? If not, thanks again, Joel. Appreciate your report. So our next report is from the chair of the GASAC, Robert.
Thank you, Kathy. My very abbreviated report is on master page 124 of your materials. And the reason for its abbreviated status is the quirks and the timing of the council meetings versus the board meetings. Our first meeting of the year happened right at the beginning of the second quarter, and we reported on that at your May meeting. And our second meeting was just 2 weeks ago. And so we'll include the results of that conversation, which did include a roundtable on the pension post-implementation review, and report on that more fully at the trustees' November meeting. As Mike indicated, on the FASAC side, we're also in the process of beginning to solicit members, either new nominations or stakeholder organizations for reappointments of those members who can continue on the council for presentation to the trustees for your consideration this fall. And as the chair mentioned, I will not be in person. Hopefully the board will be in person in November, but due to a work conflict, I would only be participating virtually at best. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the board for its confidence in me, reappointing me on 2 occasions to lead the council. It's been a privilege and an honor to serve in that capacity and gain a great appreciation for the standard setting process, much more so than I probably ever had when I was first appointed to the council 11 years ago. It's been rewarding on a personal and a professional level, and I'm very glad that I had this opportunity to assist, and thankful again for the support of the trustees. So I doubt there'll be any questions on my report, but I will offer if you have any questions or comments, I'd be glad to take them.
Robert, thanks so much. We do. David, you have a question or comment for Robert?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman Scott, I just wanted to add to the accolades that have been given to you for your excellent performance and say you've been an outstanding chairman of the GASAC. I had the privilege of being a member of the GASAC for 3 years under your leadership. You did a great job. So many best wishes to you for the future.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. Cheers. Other questions or comments for Robert? If not, thank you again, Robert. Again, we hope that you won't stray too far, and we can continue to count on you participating in our work. So our next report is from the Standard Setting Process Oversight Committee, and I'm going to ask Eloise Foster and Tim Ryan to report. Eloise?
Okay. Thank you, Kathy, and good day, everyone. The standard setting process oversight committee met yesterday, and the first item on the agenda was the annual meeting with GASAC Chair Robert Scott. Since Robert's term ends in December, this was the committee's last meeting with him. Robert gave his perspective on outreach efforts that could be undertaken to get information about GASAC to decision makers who are not involved with the organization or may not even know that GASAC exists. Robert pointed out that in spite of the high turnover in GASAC over the last 2 years, he was very pleased with how well the membership had been able to assimilate. He did say that continuing to hold GASAC meetings in a virtual setting will be a challenge and could ultimately have an adverse impact on meeting quality. Finally, Robert reflected on his last 5.5 years as GASAC chair and complimented the GASB team for the great support that they have provided to the advisory council. At the conclusion of the meeting, we thank Robert for his service, and I just want to echo David Lillard's comments. It's been a pleasure seeing you in action at the GASAC meetings. You've done a terrific job. So at this point, I'm going to turn matters over to Tim to provide the FASB update.
Thank you, Eloise, and to all of our stakeholders. Thank you for joining. It's good to be with you today. I'll give you an update on our discussion that we had yesterday, and that builds off previous meetings as well with Rich Jones and Hillary Salo as well. Our discussion focused much on what Rich had already covered earlier in this session today, but where we focused on was we got an update on the agenda consultation process. We also got an update on the investor outreach efforts. Where we focused a lot of our questions and our dialogues was on the types of feedback that are coming, the number and the quantity, and also the efforts that the team was making to make sure we were getting all types of feedback. And we were very pleased with the effort that Rich and the team are putting forward to make sure we're trying to get feedback from all stakeholders. And there's been a very conscious effort to do that. We discussed the types of feedback and what was coming back as part of the agenda consultation process. And we also discussed the timeline for completion, recognizing that it is still underway. We also spent quite a bit of time going through the PIR efforts that Rich updated on. And specifically, as he talked about CECL, leases, and revenue recognition, the committee's questions focused on how the PIR process focuses both on technical aspects as well as the cost benefit portion. And at which point in the life cycle during the PIR review, you'd get to cost benefit, recognizing when you look at something like CECL, the focus to date has been on technical corrections and improvements as the team has gone through that. We also got an update from Rich and Hillary on the FASB technical agenda in our meeting as well. And that covers the dialogue that we have with Rich as FASB chair. What I'd also like to do is give you an update on the PCC matters as well, because we did receive a quarterly report update from Sue Cosper yesterday. She is the FASB member liaison to the Private Company Council. Sue gave her perspectives on the June PCC meeting. Our questions, and I'll come to Rick Reisig in a second because he observed the meeting, and I'll ask for his feedback. Our questions focus on level of participation, whether we saw any fall off given COVID and fatigue, the types of people who are showing up. And Sue gave us good feedback that there's still been really good engagement, notwithstanding the COVID and fatigue that may be happening as well. But Rick, it may be helpful if you want to maybe share your observations, given that you had the opportunity to participate in that meeting.
Thanks a lot, Tim. But yeah, the meeting was very robust as far as the discussion. A large part of the discussion centered around the practical expedience that the PCC was proposing to FASB, and there was great interaction between the PCC members themselves along with the FASB members. So I think they very well vetted that particular issue.
Yep, thank you, Rick. And the last comment I'll make before I turn it over, Kathy, back to you. We did spend, as a committee, going through the report that Rich referred to, the investor outreach report, and we felt that was a really good piece of work, not only to summarize the efforts of the team, but also for transparency, so our stakeholders can see the intense effort that is being put around, yet reaching out to investors as well. So we're happy to see that out on the website today. So thank you, Rich and team, for that.
So Kathy, I'd like to just follow up and just give a little update on what was going on with GASB at yesterday's meeting. During his quarterly reports to the committee, the GASB chair was very excited to talk about the new stakeholder outreach methods that he described a few moments ago. And we were really very interested in that and thought that was a terrific job. Joel also highlighted the user forums and public hearings that the GASB held during the second quarter of 2021. And then he discussed the 4 proposals that were issued for public comment. Joel provided his quarterly update on the status of GASB's agenda projects, noting that redeliberation on both the financial reporting model and the revenue and expense recognition model had begun in June. Finally, Alan Skelton reviewed the status of 5 of GASB's post-implementation project reviews. Now, at each of the committee meetings that we hold, we ask members to report on meetings that they may have attended. We discuss the advisory groups, we discuss FASB and other GASB meetings that have been observed during the past quarter. So Rich Reisig talked about the Tribal Government Accounting Working Group meeting that he observed last June. Rick and Chandran Thomas said a few words about the June GASB meeting that they had observed. David Lillard and I reported on the recent GASAC meetings that we observed, and Mary Barth provided some comments on the May meetings of the FASB's Investor Advisory Committee and the CISO Roundtable. We like to take the opportunity in this forum to hear from other trustees who have had the opportunity to observe a meeting. One of the newer trustees, Tim Christen, observed a FASB meeting in June, and Mike Rollins observed a FASB meeting in July. Tim, would you just like to take a few moments and share with us your observations on that meeting?
Sure. Thanks, Eloise. And I observed the FASB board meeting of June 23rd. It was a very brief, limited agenda meeting. The singular topic was intangible assets and accounting for goodwill. And it was the first meeting I've observed. And what really struck me is the professionalism of the group and the investor focus that really clearly came through, which I know is a topic we discuss a lot, and how these would impact the investors. And while the board members certainly had slightly different views of what was going on, there was a very proactive and positive approach to the whole thing. So I was quite impressed, and it was not a particularly consequential meeting in that it was a limited agenda, but I thought it was well done by the board.
Thank you, Tim. Mike, would you share your observations with us?
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Eloise. So I had the opportunity to, as Eloise mentioned, observe the July 14th FASB meeting. And this was a decision-making meeting for the board to weigh in on a few topics coming out of the PIR of the CECL expected credit loss standard. We've heard that mentioned a few times today. The issues discussed included whether or not the board should add a couple of projects to the technical agenda, troubled debt restructuring for creditors and purchase credit deteriorated assets, as well as whether they should remove from the agenda a project related to codification improvements of financial instrument credit losses. Given this was my first meeting, as mentioned, relatively new trustee, I had a couple of comments and observations. First, I thought Rich Jones, as chairman, did a really nice job ensuring that each board member had the opportunity to provide feedback on each of the discussion topics. He made a concerted effort to go around the table to each board member on every question so that everyone had the opportunity to weigh in with their views. Second, I would say it was also really apparent to me that each of the board members had done their homework on each of the topics in question, and they were very prepared to discuss the intricacies of the standards, and there were many, and I didn't understand all of them for sure, but certainly a robust discussion there. The FASB staff was also at hand and was regularly consulted during the meetings to provide clarification perspectives. I would also say that the discussion among the board was robust, with members, as Tim alluded to, expressing different opinions at times on specific standards. Each of the board members was clearly comfortable expressing different opinions, backed up by rationale, which to me highlighted both their independence as well as their different perspectives and experience, which they're bringing to bear. And then I would just finalize it with, it's good to see the effectiveness firsthand of the post-implementation review process, in action. The PIR process is an important component. It's been discussed here a number of times. ensuring that new standards rolled out have the intended effect and provide constituents with decision useful information. That discussion last month really offered strong support to me that the FASB board is doing exactly what they can to ensure that the new standards are meeting that need. So with that, great, really enjoyed the discussion and learned a little bit about troubled debt restructurings and purchase of credit deteriorated assets that I never knew.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Mike. Madam Chair, that concludes the report of the Oversight Committee.
Thank you very much, Eloise and Tim. Our next report is from the FAF Executive Director, John Auchincloss. John?
Thanks, Kathy. I'm going to report briefly on some matters that we're working on at the FAF. With respect to COVID, although we had previously announced an intention to reopen our offices on September 7th, we very recently decided to delay our reopening until the 11th of October, given the recent increase in COVID transmission in our region. We're going to continue to monitor closely the case counts in our area and, of course, official guidance from state and local authorities. When we do reopen, we will have hybrid work policies and schedules in place. In June and July, we held well-attended information sessions for staff concerning our new flexible ways of working policy. Our expectations are for employees to be in the office 3 or 4 days a week and working remotely on the other days. We have not, however, made any decisions yet on when we will be able to open our offices to visitors or to resume business travel. Turning to appointments, the Appointments Committee of our Board of Trustees, supported by the FAF staff and by our outside search firms, has continued with the important work of appointing successors to members of both our standard setting boards and advisory groups. As we have previously announced, we are currently searching for a GASB member to replace Jim Brown, whose final term will end on June 30th of 2022. New trustees to replace our current trustees, Sue Carter, Tony Dowd, and Eloise Foster, whose terms will end on December 31st, 2021. We conducted interviews related to those searches over the past several months, and we hope to be able to announce appointments later this fall. Finally, I'd like to update you briefly on our content vision and enablement project, which we call by the acronym of CV&E, which is designed to take our publishing system into the 21st century. We successfully kicked off the final implementation phase of this project. In fact, we're now in month 4 of implementation, and we're currently on track, both with respect to revised timeline and to the budget. We expect to complete the CV&E project in the second quarter of next year. As I have previously noted, although stakeholders may not notice significant change in the way they access our standards and related information, not immediately, at least in the near term, the project will deliver tremendous business value through better internal processes and technology backbone that can continue to adapt as our needs and the available technology changes. And Kathy, that's my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, John. Are there any questions for John on his report? If not, thanks so much, John. Appreciate that. Our final report is from our treasurer on our financials. Eloise?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today's report is an update on the FAST financial status for the 6 months ending June 30th, 2021. The results of this report are reflected on master page 125. The net assets of the FAF have grown by almost 24 million during the first and second quarters of this year. This increase acknowledges that all accounting support fees were recognized at the beginning of the year. The $2.3 million in savings represents lower travel and meeting expenses related to COVID-19, a reduction in relocation expenses, salary savings, and lower than anticipated employee benefit costs. These savings were offset by an unfavorable variance in investment income of $409,000 due to market conditions. Position headcount for the organization is 5 below budget. But overall, at the close of the second quarter of 2021, the FAF is in good shape and our balance sheet remains strong. Madam Chair, that concludes the Treasurer's report.
Thank you very much, Eloise. So this marks the end of our public session and our meeting of the FAF Board of Trustees. I want to thank everyone for tuning into the webcast and remind you that the next FAF Board of Trustees meeting will be held on Tuesday, November 16th. With that, I want to thank you all and wish you all the best day. Thank you.